hopefully those terms will, we'll get more description when Hal and his friend come on.
Well, before they get here, Wally, how are you doing? Tom, how are you doing?
Tom, go ahead.
Oh, I'm doing all right. I was just in Prague 2 weeks ago.
Oh, amazing.
The World Championship. Terry Johnson went with me, a former NHL defenseman. I've coached with him a lot. And, we had just a great time.
It must have been really exciting, too.
Oh, it was just like people there are so wired. I mean, outside the rink, there's about at least 1,000 people partying before every game. There's a gigantic screen and everybody's got their jerseys on, and the whole city was, cranked up for it. Like in the airport, the urinals had goalie like nets in them, and the target
That's
to
awesome.
shoot at.
It's my bucket list to go to a men's championship in Europe, because I've just heard that they're just bananas.
Oh yeah, I went to Latvia last year. I wanted my son to see one of them. So there was no coaching conference. It was in Finland, but this year there was the symposium, and it's not a bad deal because I think it cost $600. You got 3 tickets to games, and they were at least 150 or more each because they were really good seats. But then I know a lot of those guys at those conferences, and there's always a few good talks and stuff.
Yeah, and it's almost like you have instant friends when you go over, right? Like you get to watch with them and debrief about the games, and that sounds fun.
Yeah, and there was a guy from Toronto who moved to Salzburg. His cousin has a bar in Salzburg. He's from Dublin. So he went there to just be there for a little while. He liked it so much he's been there for 14 years now. But he knows a girl that has a place in Prague, but she only stays there sometime. So she let us stay in her apartment, so that was free.
Oh, amazing.
So 3 of us stayed there, so that was great too. And it was good.
And you're there for 2 weeks?
No, just a week.
Just a week.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. And who are you coaching this coming year, or are you coaching?
Yeah, I'll be coaching what I coached last year on U15 girls.
With Cassie now, or her daughter's age?
Well, if I can get her daughter, there's 3 teams, and there's a draft, and you never know who you're going to get. You get someone on your list, and someone takes them, and I'm going to try to. She's coaching spring hockey now, which is really in that. But she did a great thing for hockey overall, I think, when she's on that board for Hockey Canada.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what did she do?
Well, one that's been a pain in the rear end is having 19 players. So you get 17, and you always have that uneven, that you got to work around. You got 11 forwards and 6D or 5D and 12 forwards. And we talked about it a lot, and she says, I'm going to talk to the board about it. Well, it got changed, and now there's going to be 20, which would be a lot better for everything, practices and games.
And what age group does that extend down to?
Someone got a letter saying that's what it is now.
Oh, okay, so, even like U11 and stuff.
I think so, but I never saw the letter, but someone said they got something from Hockey Alberta or something saying rosters are now 20.
Oh, nice.
So.
What do you think of that, Sami?
Yeah, I mean, I thought you were going to say, Tom, it went the other way, that it went down to 3 lines rather than up to 4 lines. I thought you were going to say it went the other way, but yeah, if there's, not enough coaches to go around to coach more teams, I guess this allows more players to play at that level. Makes it easier for the coaches. So, I mean, I think I would prefer at those levels less players and they get more playing time, but as a coach,
you do what you can. They had rosters of 15 skaters, even though they were 17. But I like it if it's a lot better than 19.
Yeah, for sure. The in between is tough.
Yeah, it didn't really make any sense. I know that the NHL used to have 3 lines and 2 penalty killers. That was kind of a standard thing in the 60s and all that kind of stuff. But nobody does that.
When we played Arrows, Kenny always played an extra forward that just rotated through each of the lines and
Yeah.
played like left wing, center, right wing, then the next line, left wing, center, right wing. So it's
Yeah,
just one person that was doing that.
Yeah, that's one way you can do it, but
Yeah.
it's always somebody doing that.
Yeah.
But even for practice, when you get a partner, there's an uneven number.
Right. Yeah. There's always a group of 3.
It's just, I
Hey,
just
Tom, you're the only guy that knows how to run an efficient whole ice practice. Quite frankly, I think coaches are going to find it too difficult to have that many to use everybody efficiently. But I just believe, like Sami mentioned, her logic was numbers and getting more kids involved. You have fewer coaches. My logic is different, is that it's actually at the elite level, they got to get used to short shift and 4 lines. But in minor hockey, 3 lines is reasonable, easier to handle on the bench. Not the practices. Practices may work very well, but we have a problem in girls hockey Calgary with U13. There's only one goalie.
Mm.
And
but it doesn't matter how many you got then. It's just totally changes your practice, right?
Yeah.
Tom usually brought out a second goalie and extra players, giving them an opportunity to practice. So I hope it sticks, but I think at the elite level, I know I had some pushback at the U13 level coaches. They preferred to have 3 lines and that's it, because they usually only play 2 and short shift the other anyway.
And how long is a game?
The games are no floods, 20 minutes stop, 5 with a 5-minute break between periods.
So they end up being about an hour and a half, would you say?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
That was right to Tom, eh? About an hour and a half.
I don't know but they were stop time. Like
Yeah.
at the U15, we got regulation kind of games. So 4 lines is all right with stop time. 4 lines, if you're playing, straight time, would be not that much ice time for players.
Mm-hmm.
I've never played in a game in my life with 4 lines.
Yeah.
It was always, when I played, it was always 3 lines. When I played in this one league down in the States, you could only dress, to save money, you could only dress 16 players. So that was 2 goalies, right? So it was basically 3 lines and 5D, I guess. So, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. So when do you find out if you get to coach? Do you guys do the draft like in September? If you coach with Cass?
Well, yeah, the tryout is at the end of August. Then after the tryout, there's a draft, and then you got your team.
Okay.
So you really don't know, but I think that I got a 50-50 chance of getting her. Because
Yeah.
if I take her early-ish, because she isn't she's not in the top 20%.
Right. But if you took her in that spot, then you would get her.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. What level is this? AA?
Yeah, I don't know why it's not called AAA, because it's the best level in the province.
Hmm.
Like the boys comparable, I got a friend that coaches the boys at that level, and it's called AAA. And,
yeah, that seems backwards to me.
Yeah, I have no idea why we're called AA.
Interesting. And Wally, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing okay. I've had a little bit of trouble with breathing lately, so I'm experimenting with diuretics and trying to get things under control. But Tom, are you skating tomorrow?
Yeah.
Where at?
At Centennial.
Okay, I'm going to drop off the projector. Like right now, I'm leery about what I'm going to do next year, Sami. So I'm sort of going week to week and setting goals, short-term goals, and striving to reach them. And the health is sort of one of my concerns, but nothing that I haven't faced for a few years. So, Sammy, I got a question. Like I wrote down some questions, knowing you would be on.
Yeah, so let's talk women's hockey until Hal gets here. For sure. Let's do it.
Well, the first question I had, you said you want to watch the men's worlds. And is that to benefit your broadcasting, expand your horizon, just to get a feel? Because most of the guys are on, and we talk guys hockey. And right now, NHL hockey's on. So I've always grappled with talking about girls hockey, talking about guys hockey, who's more interested. So what's your reasoning here get to the men's world? Is it
Well, a couple things. I think bucket list item because it is an event. So it's like going to the Grey Cup or it's like going to the Brier. I think it's a party, right, Tom? It's unlike anything else, and that's how people
yeah.
talk about it. It's
Total
not the on ice, right?
I'll send you a link to the 50 pictures I took. I think you.
Okay. So it'd be like going to the Tour de France or something that I've been to the men's worlds in Canada. It's different. I also broadcasted for the Olympic broadcasting services, the men's hockey at the Olympics. So have a familiarity somewhat with some of the nations. But it has nothing to do with the on ice. In fact, I don't think I would even necessarily care about any of that. It's everything else and how passionate the fans are. It's unlike anything I think we see here. So that's why it's a
decent game. So because
decent games. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
well, Sammy, let's get into the female hockey evolution.
Okay. And remember, it's women's and girls.
Yes, women's and girls.
Yes. As we change our vernacular. Not always easy, but don't worry, I'll be there to correct you along the way.
Okay. Go ahead. You started because you're in the middle of the transition to professional female sports, hockey, and the growth of female sports generally. And Caitlin Clark in basketball has finally been able to garner some financial reward, but more importantly, publicity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you broadcast, most important thing is your ratings.
Yes.
How many listeners are you getting?
So, Wally, I don't know if you know, Wally and Tom, that I'm not involved in the PWHL at all. So there is still the hurt and sadness, I think, that goes along with that, with never, it's not necessarily that you want the job. I think, as coaches, we all recognize this scenario where it's not necessarily you want the job, but you want to be asked to decline the job or to want the job. So to never be asked is hard. To see a lot of my colleagues that have put so much time and effort into women's hockey, to never be asked is hard. So it's a very inclusive, exclusive, group. And I recognize that, lots of people have incredible wealth of information and knowledge within this game, and that others can certainly take it to a different level than we ever could. So super exciting what's happening in the game, but it doesn't include us, and that can be hard at times. I told myself I wasn't going to watch any games this year, and then of course I watched every single game. So but it's a different setup than I think some of the other times. I mean, it's our leagues in the past with 10x the amount of money into marketing. So less salaries than maybe we had before. So the salaries for the players is less, but the amount of money in marketing is huge. So every single game this year was fully produced by the PWHL. So at about a $50,000 to $75,000 hit for every game. We never had that kind of money. So TSN and Sportsnet are not paying for it currently. Of course, they want to get a deal, but that means 60 games times that amount of money that the PWHL was able to fully produce protect, produce in their own way, you know? So I feel like what's exciting is so many people now know about women's professional hockey. I have people asking me about it all the time. You know, people don't know the history and all of that, which I don't expect them to. Most people are new to the game. But I think what's hard for me and a lot of my peers is that history gets rewritten in a certain way by those in power. And I think this extends beyond sport for sure. This is can go with race relations, gender relations. But whoever is the one currently in power gets to have the narrative. And, you know, the narrative right now is that it's the first, that it's different, that it's all of these things. And for those of us, including you two, that have been in the game for so long, have seen so many iterations come through and so many people put so much time and effort into it. For all of that to be erased is hard to see. But it's opened up a whole new set of eyeballs. Following along with the WNBA, you know, the same thing is kind of felt that this is what we've always wanted, you know, and that's what a lot of women in the WNBA that comment on it, that play in it, this is what we've always wanted. But the narrative now is all around Caitlin Clark, who is not the best player in the WNBA. Now, that's not to say she's not good, but her being left off the Olympic team was a big deal. But she's young. She's, you know, this is 144 of the best women in the entire world in basketball. And she will be there eventually. But the narrative is forgotten that for 23 years, the WNBA has existed prior to Caitlin Clark, and that people are coming in, making comments on the game that perhaps are lacking historical context. So, you know, I think I struggle with both sides. It's exactly where women's hockey is exactly where we always wanted it to be. I think we just always thought it would include us, and that's hard.
That's kind of strange that you did so well and all that, and then you're not part of this.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Is Cassie's a consultant or something, or tried to get advertising for them or something?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm happened to get to Ottawa and spend a week with Carla and her team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that was really exciting out there in Ottawa, what she was creating.
And the atmosphere in the stands, it was just incredible. The manager, and this is what I'm sort of learned, is everybody seems to have hired managers with NHL experience. And the model of the NHL and the funding and the spectrum of things that go on behind the scenes in the entertainment business, regardless of sports or what it is. I believe that managerial group, or whoever's put the money aside, I understand the owner of the baseball.
The Dodgers, yeah, LA Dodgers. Mm-hmm.
They're just following a business model, not regarding what your conversation and your concerns is, the culture and the history.
For sure, it's business now. You know, it is a real business, and so there's going to be people left over. What's really interesting is, you know, so this year I've been out of hockey altogether, except for broadcasting. So I still get to work for TSN for the World Championships. So that's a separate entity altogether. So I get to do the U18s in the Worlds. But I've gone back into being a full-time professional speaker and management consultant, and so working with businesses. And I am now getting hired in the space of mergers and acquisitions and takeovers, which is really interesting because having gone through it with the CWHL and now with the PHF and the PWHL, this is a space I never thought that I would be in, but managing teams' expectations when they go through mergers, they go through acquisitions in the corporate world. I mean, these feelings are all the same. They're not any different. So all of this learning, and that's what I try to take away from it, is that despite some of the difficulties, I think the hardest thing is you like the people you worked with, you like those people and you want them to succeed, but it's business now. And so I think I have all these new appreciations and understandings for a different segment, I think, that has been great for me. So, you still get to talk hockey, you still get to talk about your teams and the different characters within the team, but in a very different space.
Sami, one of the things that back in my era, in your era of playing female hockey, I called the female national team pure hockey. And Matt Hoven,
Women.
at the University of
Women's hockey, Wally. Women's hockey.
He's written a book on Father David Bauer, and I mentioned that Father Bauer would have loved the female model because it was pure sport. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about winning at all costs, although that was the expectation of the governing body. I always took the Father Bauer approach as be the best you can be and enjoy the experience. So that's why I actually appreciated the female game. It's not the sport. It's the sport of hockey, not the business of hockey. So I'm concerned and generally about sport becoming just a business, and what sports supposedly can teach and accomplish in terms of societal impact is going to be lost, and maybe more harm be done than good if we're not cognizant of it, particularly with young people growing up.
I'm really curious about Carla's experience because, I think everybody loved playing for her. What a great experience it was in Ottawa. Tons of people in the stands, tons of following behind the Ottawa team, but then they didn't make the playoffs. So, does that change? I think in Carla's mind it doesn't, but now somebody else is hiring her, So if you're a coach hired to win, which this is professional hockey, she didn't succeed. But for all those players that said, they loved playing for her, that was, is that more important but maybe not at the professional level? So I don't know. I'm curious from her perspective if that was a disappointing or, yeah.
Well, I'm going to try to get her to come on, Sami, but have you moderate the session.
That'd be fun.
That would be really good. I'll see if I can arrange it, and because in my visit there, I got to witness the pressure of winning and losing.
Mm-hmm.
Her wondering whether she would get her job next year and stay at the U of C and have a guaranteed comfortable.
Right. Yeah. And most of those coaches just took a 1-year leave of absence, right? Like, who's the U of A coach?
Howie Draper.
Howie. Yeah. So who was on here?
Went back.
Yeah. So he'll be back, I guess, at U of A, and, Haley Irwin, who was at Ryerson, is Carla's assistant, right?
Yeah.
I think. So she only took a 1-year leave of absence as well. So a lot of them that were U Sports, the U Sports granted them a lot of leniency, but they won't continue to do that. So.
And they just announced Josh is now the permanent coach at U of C.
Oh, so that means Carla's probably back.
Yeah, she's committed.
Yeah. Okay.
So meeting the manager and him at her at the same time and judging the pressure of not winning, I felt it was a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
There's, when you look at the NHL and you're hired to be fired if you don't win, well, it's a process.
Yeah, well, the winning general manager in the PWHL got fired for Minnesota. Yeah. So that's interesting too. Like, what went on there, that you did exactly what was asked of you, which is to win.
Yeah.
And then you're fired. So.
Well, that's the business of sports. You don't know who pushes what buttons where in terms of
Right.
decision making. And that's what always has bothered me about NHL hockey is I think the organizations with sort of a synergistic leadership and a sound philosophy of operation agreed upon by the leaders of the organization at every level guarantee success. And I'm really happy for Jim Nill, Tom. He's been selected the general manager of the year a second time. And knowing Jim, having worked with him when he was a young junior player growing up, and just knowing the way he approached things, he admitted to Tom and I years ago that any of 20 teams in the NHL could win the Stanley Cup.
So I think it was the same in the PWHL this year. It looked like any team could win any game. And what's really surprising, I really like Howie Draper, and every player that's ever played for him really enjoys playing for him. But then he didn't see that success at the professional level. So I would be curious to a debrief with him. I don't know if either one of you guys chat with him, but what his experience was like. He seems super eager and excited about the opportunity. So, and as both of you know, I feel like he goes in with the right mentality of, the person first. And at least when he has been on the Sharks calls, that's what he seems like. So I'd be curious.
Well, it's all, when it's that close, it comes down to players.
Yeah.
If you all did exactly the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember taking the hockey class at Bemidji from the coach, and most of the time he just BS'd about things. And then the last class, he talked about, building a team, and the key to success, he wrote on the board in huge letters, TALENT. And he said, that's the most important thing.
Talent wins. Yeah.
Well, if you do a good job and they're just not good enough, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, it was noticeable in the playoffs that you have a top team in Toronto that looks like they're going to win the whole thing, and then they meet a really hot goalie in Maddie Rooney in Minnesota, and she shuts them out, and then they move on. And
that's the thing too,
yeah.
Right? I know my last year at Mount Royal, we came in first, and my goalie, both of them got so cold. We were out shooting the other teams like 35 to 20, but.
So it all comes down to goaltending, is what we're saying.
Oh, it does. Like, look at Bobrovsky.
Yeah.
He's on no way Edmonton shouldn't have won that first game, but
he's been unreal. And Skinner's not been bad. It's, he's letting in what I would assume you would probably let in, the amount of goals, but Bobrovsky has just been lights out.
Yeah. Well, my philosophy has always been, you ask your defense and goalies 2 or less goals, and your offense 3 or more.
Yeah.
So he hasn't let in more than 2. So I think he's doing his job.
He's given his team a chance to win, which is all you can ask, right?
I sent an email with my Prague pictures.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Sami, I got a question about Toronto. Tom talked about talent. And how much of a factor was Spooner's injury?
Yeah, that was huge. They after she went down with the knee injury, they only scored 1 more goal in the series. So they just couldn't put the puck in the net without her. And that could have just simply been, lines couldn't connect, couldn't create chemistry. But that was a huge hit. But what a year Natalie Spooner had. I feel like with the national team, she's had so many ups and downs and been put into so many different roles. And, these last 3 years have been really hard on the national team players because they haven't been able to play. So you can never prove yourself. You never have somewhere where you can showcase your talents, where you can just simply toil away in obscurity. And, So the fact that she got to do that this year, finally again, I mean, any team I've ever been a part of with Natalie Spooner, she's a gamer. Like she's the one that shows up. And the last 3 years of no games, I'm sure hasn't been easy. So then with the national team, she gets demoted, and then not really being utilized in any way that is important. But what I loved about this season was she just kind of really came into her own and just started to play her game again and used her talents and shot the puck, which her shooting percentage was unreal. Like, I think it was like 40% higher than the next person in the league or something. So.
Well, I'm impressed. All of the national players that are playing in the league are getting better.
Oh yeah, and so is everybody else. Yeah.
That's the first thing I noticed. But just focusing on somebody like Natalie, she went from being a middle of the road player to being a top player.
Yeah.
In the league and impacting the national team now. Her role is elevated. Her confidence is elevated. Her image is elevated.
It'll be curious to see, because at the World Championships, their play in the league did not affect their status or whether they made the team or not. So it did seem like Tom Ryan? No. Yeah, that's his coach. What's the coach's name?
I forget. He was coach of the year in the PWA.
Coach Ryan didn't seem to select his team based on performance in the league. So, for instance, his goalie Kristen Campbell had come into the World Championships leading the league in shutouts and save percentage, and still saw no games, just as we sort of expected in prior years. He still went with the goalies in the order that they had been. Same with the players, seemed to be in the order they had been prior to the league. And no one was invited that had been doing well. So Daryl Watts or players like that they hadn't sort of got themselves back into a situation, or Katie Tabin, a defenseman, players that really excelled in the league. So I'm curious for the September camp, if any of those players get invited to an actual camp. It'll be interesting to see if it changes the dynamics of who they are selecting and where they're utilizing those players. Like, does Spooner now make your top line? She should, because she's proven herself, but who knows?
That would be frustrating to be playing against the same players, doing better than them, and then, you're back to
or they're your teammates too, right? And they're on the third line and you're on the top line. There's a great exit interview with Daryl Watts after Ottawa lost out and missed the playoffs, which is like a 10-minute interview. And, she's on a 1-year contract, probably making $35,000. And just talking about how, she's kind of got to shop around now. Like, she has no guarantees in Ottawa. There's no more money to go around. So 8 players on every team got guaranteed 3-year contracts, which is basically the Olympians. And so all of these other players are kind of left in limbo. There's maybe an additional $10,000 per team that can be spread out amongst your other players to increase their salaries. But then you also drafted the draft class was huge. So those players should garner big salaries as well, but they can't. There's just no more money to go around. So yeah, that would be frustrating when you know that you outplayed that person, but they're on a 3-year contract valued at, near $100,000. That could be tough.
Well, I look at it like a historian. It's an evolution.
For sure.
You've got a pro league, and pretty soon you're going to have the Olympic team be a pro model where you're going to be picking players from the league.
Yeah, and I think Wally, I don't know for sure, but I would assume they're done with centralization. I don't know how you centralize and have this league continue at this level.
Yeah, they probably have to do what the NHL does and just,
do camps. Yeah.
And have something in the summer or something.
At least they have more international breaks built into every women's pro hockey schedule. So in Sweden, in Russia, and in the PWHL, they had breaks built in. So there's more time to be able to play in like a Four Nations Cup or the rivalry series, those kind of things. So I think you can still fit those in. You just can't fit in a whole centralization.
Yeah, I remember when I was in Salzburg, there was times that they went to the national teams and all that. And
Mhm.
nothing went around for a little while.
Yeah.
Well, Sammy, the thing that impressed me watching the Pro League is the number of female players that I hadn't heard of that I began to appreciate. So the talent pool is much bigger. And
Well, and I think that was the frustration in our league, right? Because all these players played in our league in the PHF, and there was always the thought that the players that held out, that boycotted, were so much better than these players that were actually playing on a daily basis. And so I think the PHF players had an advantage to start the season because they were used to the grind. They were used to being on the road, and being full-time hockey players, because ours were all full-time hockey players. So, I think you're right. Eventually, the national team players caught up, and I think, by the end of the season, I think the cream kind of rise to the top. But even, on the Minnesota team, Michaela Cava, who was our MVP last year, was drafted pretty low. And yet she was nearly the MVP next to Taylor Heisey. She had the most points in the playoffs for Minnesota and really was dominant. So there wasn't the appreciation, I think, by the management or the coaches that had just been in that national team silo of who was going to emerge as the top players. Hannah Miller on Toronto was another top player that had been playing over in the Russian league and had played for China at the Olympic Games and had just this whole storied hockey history before she even got to the Toronto team, and then ended up on a line with Natalie Spooner, and the chemistry was just unsurpassed. So it was really nice to see these players getting the accolades they deserved, when for so long they had been told they played in a beer league, or they're not really professional, or they aren't good hockey players, or whatever.
well, what opened my eye the most was watching the dryland training of both teams when they were there in 2 days early, and you get to see them work out, and the size, the fitness, they were cut, they were athletes. That was the bottom line.
Right.
The era of just being a hockey player has gone full circle, and every one of the girls has to be fit.
Yeah, that's been long gone for the last decade, I would say. When really NCAA prominence came into, there's no choice but to be fit. You're never going to make it if you're not the ultimate athlete.
Well, I've been out of it for 10 years. And so walking into it for the
Yeah,
first
it was
time,
different.
that was my immediate reaction. My God, athletes. And then the post game, the autographs, it was just authentic appreciation.
Yeah, and connection.
Yeah, it was really quite amazing. And, I left there really being optimistic about it. I worry a little bit about, the bottom line is going to be attendance and dollars and cents.
For sure.
A lot of what we talked about. So, well, what is the attendance in terms of sustenance in the East American coast teams? Are they going to?
So, for instance, in Boston and Minnesota and
like
New York
is talking about expansion, realistic even, because the hockey may be good enough, but if you don't have a fan support or a base, to what degree will it be financed externally or supported externally?
Well, I think the model for professional sport in general, Wally, has changed, let alone women's sport. And I saw that firsthand working the PHF, that it wasn't yes, you want it to be sustainable and that you want your profits to match your losses in a year. But when you have an ownership group, that is not the primary concern. The primary concern is increasing the valuation of the franchise to be resold. So that's where the money really is made, when you resell the franchise. And so, in my opinion, that's what they're doing in the PWHL, is they have an 8-year bargaining agreement with the players. The owner, who owns all the teams, has an 8-year commitment for financial commitment to this. And then at the end, that's, I think, when he makes his money, is when he sells those franchises. So yeah, I mean, when you expand, then that also increases the valuation, right? Because you have more money coming in at the end. So as long as you're willing to put the money in, it's like buying a house, you know, you're willing to put the money in, you work really hard, and then at the end, it's the sale that is so it's a different process. But, you know, I think that they certainly did great numbers in attendance this year. And it was noticeable when it was marketed that rinks were filled very, very fast. Scotiabank Place here, and in Montreal, the Bell Center, and even in Minnesota during the playoffs, and Boston during the playoffs, crowds came when they knew about it, you know. And it's always been the hard thing in women's sport, is getting the word out there. And that's what the PWHL is doing a really great job of, is getting the word out.
I think in all the sports, like in Calgary, without newspapers being, you know, hard copies, it's really hard to know about anything.
Anything.
Like
yeah, any local
EFL,
sports.
fine.
Yeah.
You just, unless you go to their website, you know, and they hardly talk about it on the sports radio. And even Saskatchewan last year wasn't sold out for a Western Conference playoff game, which is unbelievable. You know, and so the marketing, it's pretty tricky right now.
And there's so much noise, right? When you're marketing, there's just so much you're competing against. So yeah, it's not easy. But I thought that the PWHL did a good job of breaking through that this year. But that takes a lot of money. You know, it isn't just one person sitting there and emailing people, which we've seen in the past in women's hockey. It's a whole team of people that are working in all different aspects of marketing and communications. And yeah.
Yeah, it's a different world as far as that kind of stuff goes. Like, you don't know in Calgary where that Mount Royal University is playing. You know, there's one game a year they really push, and at the Saddle Dome. But other than that, you know, and same the junior A team, like all the teams, there's nothing.
Right.
You know, without a newspaper there, you really don't see it. You have to go to someone's website.
Yeah. So, or go to an actual game and get a schedule. But if you don't want to know when that first one is, it's hard to follow.
Yeah. I'll tell you, Wally told me that the team from Beijing, the girls team, was playing a team from Calgary.
U13. Yeah.
U13. I think it was U14 because there were some of my ex-players there.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was scary to watch. The Calgary girls' skills were so much below theirs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like they handled the puck like, I think it's kind of like the club system in Europe where you really get fundamental skills early. Everybody can make a pass, take a pass. And big thing is they recognized pressure and spun away and made the play, where the Calgary girls just skate right into it and lose the puck. And the score, it was a runtime game. It was 7-1 for the Chinese.
Interesting.
If it was stop time, it would have been a 12.
Yeah.
That was pretty scary to watch about what we're doing in our development.
Well, I mean, you take, those are the top players in China coming, right?
No, it's just Beijing.
I know it's just Beijing, but there's Beijing, there's Harbin, and there's Shenzhen. So there's like 3 centers of players. So you have, you know, there's maybe another 3 or 4 teams like that in China. Whereas in Canada, there's another 100 teams at that level. So the one thing I like about the small system like China, or like hockey in Texas or things like that, is you have access to really great coaching all the time. and you get to be on every team. So there's no, it's like what Wally has always talked about. Like there's no tiering of the kids. Every kid is playing and every kid is being coached to the maximum, because that you need everybody on the team to be able to succeed. So
It's the same in Europe with the clubs.
yeah, with the club system. And I love that. So, and they all have access to great coaching, and there isn't that pressure to create teams, to pick teams, to leave kids off teams. So it definitely, obviously, it showed that they all have the skill.
Yeah. And the way they played the game, they played the game well. You know, they were moving the puck, and
Good for them.
For girls that age, they played the game.
When we played in Shenzhen with the Canadian Women's Hockey League and would go there would be busloads of kids that would come from the Beijing Hockey Association to come and watch too. And like, this was a really big deal, and their aspiration to play in that league. And it was fun to see them. And same with Hong Kong would come over. I mean, it would just, that was the thing to see. Everybody knew to come and watch the CWHL play. So.
Yeah, when I was coaching Mount Royal, Steve Carlisle was coaching the Chinese team. I think they were hosting the championship that year. And they practiced with us, and we scrimmaged with them a few times. The big thing that they loved was my girls made up a dance warm-up.
Okay.
And they had them do it with them. And, it's about a 10-minute warm-up. And they danced with them, and they really got a kick out of that.
Well, that's awesome. That's what sport's all about. Bridging the cultures,
Sami, I got a question about, we're talking about female professional hockey.
Women's professional hockey.
Pardon me. Thank you. And the WNBA as a model being ahead of the game, is there anything to be learned or garnered from that experience?
Yeah, there's been some great white papers, Wally, written about it. I think there's sort of two schools of thought. One is you have the NBA backing, and so you instantly have access to the marketing machine that is the NBA. And so I think that was the PWHPA's intent, was to partner with the NHL, realizing that they could instantly get a ton of marketing and expertise from the NHL. But I'm almost glad for them that it didn't work out, because it allows them to have autonomy over their own league, which I think is something the WNBA has struggled with at times. That WNBA has been sort of a second-class citizen to the NBA within their marketing profiles and everything, and don't always get treated in the best aspect. Although certain things have certainly augmented in the last couple of years, but in the WNBA, there are independently owned teams and there are some league-owned teams. So there's kind of a mixed model. Whereas in the PWHL, they have like one central ownership, which allows them to have full autonomy over all of the decisions. So on-ice rules, how teams are set up, where they play, all of those comes down to, it's easier to make one decision. But I think eventually they'll have to be sold off and then have independent owners. And I think that will change the landscape for sure, because then you'll have, maybe it's the NHL model of having governors and one commissioner. But that will certainly change. So the WNBA is about 26 years old, I think, 32 years old, something like that. So they certainly are further ahead than hockey is, simply because they've had years under their belt. However, what hockey has has generations of players that have played at this top level and have attempted to create this professional league that they've desired. But more than that, they have all the learnings from the WNBA, from the National Women's Soccer League, and from other leagues that have gone. There's I think it's AUA. It's a women's league in the US, which is a really interesting model that they have 4 or 5 different sports under their umbrella. And then, so for instance, if it's the volleyball season, all the pro volleyball players come in and they play matches and they play kind of a season, but every game is, players get points in that game. and then it gets restructured the next game. So you play with different players all the time. And you as a person are getting points in order to have score in the top 10 for the end of the season. So it's less about a team winning and more about individuals getting a big purse at the end. But you need your teammates to be able to do the things that you do well. So like a back catcher might get points in a different way than a baseball pitcher would get points. So anyways, interesting model. They've been running now for about 5 seasons to much success. There's volleyball, lacrosse, softball under their umbrella for sure. But yeah, so it's not as if the PWHL has to start from scratch. And I think that that's what makes them ahead of the game, is they get to share these best practices with all these other leagues, and take from men's hockey what has worked and try to avoid what has not worked as well. So, this year I think things were put together very quickly. Maybe not everything went as they intended it to go, but they have a long off season here. I think they start back up in November. So long off season to figure out best practices for next year and try to just constantly improve. I think, I say during my speeches, if today you can just be a little bit better than you were yesterday, if next season they can just be better than they were the season before, then all of women's hockey is a little bit further ahead because of that. So, I don't think they intend to follow the WNBA model, but I certainly think there's a lot to be gleaned from it and to learn from mistakes and successes.
One of the things I want to ask you, Sami, watching the PWHL games, physicality seems to be an entertaining part of what they do. They haven't crossed the line. When you look at the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, the physicality, the size of the player, the size of the surface, they're less physical in terms of, I think they're playing a better game ethically. They're not trying to hurt each other. I'm concerned about finding that line where it's entertainment on the female side, and yet it's safe.
Well, Tom, what was your thoughts on watching it? Did you like it? Did you not like it?
I thought that the last game I saw, the playoffs there, was the best I'd seen the women's hockey play. Nobody missed passes, and I'm really kind of watching. I sit way up at the NHL games, and you can always see what the play is.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty easy sitting there watching, and 90% of the time the NHL players make the right play. They find someone, they just move the puck, and I've always thought other levels don't even compare, to them. But that last game I saw was the closest I've seen. They were making the right play at the right time. Nobody was missing passes, like hitting their stick and bobbling it and stuff like this. And I thought the level was way higher even than at the start. And they were allowing them to ride players off.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, someone just takes the body and not the puck, which isn't what they're supposed to be doing. But that wasn't even always called sometime. But I think allowing a little more contact, but then you're not playing at the end of your stick. You're not half checking someone with your stick there, like you're really playing it properly. So I was really impressed at the end with the level of the play.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. I think the last couple game, or probably the playoffs, were much better. So Wally, I think a couple things. One is, I think it surprised the players. So they were told at game 1 there's going to be contact. So that's hard, because some have grown up playing boys hockey where they would have learned how to hit and take a hit, and the majority wouldn't have. So, you're throwing your body, but are you doing it in the right way? How are you taking a hit? All of these things. So I think each team hired some development coaches to work on hitting and taking hits And you could see that as the season progressed. It wasn't just I'm throwing my body just to throw my body. While you say it wasn't over the line, Wally, there was, I would say, triple the amount of man hours, woman hours lost to injury than there ever has been at this highest level. So they're going to have to take a look at the reserve player roster, because right now it's very small. And so I think they were allowed to take 25 players max for practices. And I think that will have to rise because they lost a lot of players to whether short-term or long-term injury. And it, when somebody like Natalie Spooner goes down on a hit where, in my opinion, she's too far away from the boards, the player is too far behind the play to create contact. It just is kind of set for being able to make these kind of mistakes that lead to injuries. So there was a lot of, ankles and knees that we just have never seen in the game before. I thought there'd be way more concussions, but there wasn't that. There was sort of the awkwardness, I think, of the hit versus you're hitting your head on, or it's a huge hit and you're hitting your head on the glass or the ice. So it's not necessarily what I expected, but there was a lot of injuries. And I think, if they continue to do it in this way, it just will cut seasons players short from, that would have maybe had a long time in professional hockey prior. But I mean, I guess that's men's hockey too. So, but is that what we want in the game? I don't know, to sacrifice in terms of entertainment, because fans certainly liked it. I mean, all the new fans loved it. And so it seems to be what I hear in social media, what the players want. But now if I'm a coach or a GM, I'm certainly choosing a different kind of player. They didn't choose their players based on knowing there was going to be contact. But now I may be picking the more feisty player or the bigger player. And so what will that mean long-term for maybe the more finesse player or the shorter player? I don't know. So be interesting to see what kind of comes out of this. This was a trial year as players picked it up. I would say the end of the season had a ton of contact, just bodies flying everywhere. And penalties, the players were getting frustrated. Some were penalties, some were not playing, knowing where that line was. The refs didn't really know where the line was. And so I thought in the playoffs, it went back more to what I would say would be more of a basketball play, where you're rubbing somebody out or you're picking a player or things like that. And I liked the playoff style of hockey versus the end of the season personally. But we'll see what happens at the start of this next season.
I think that the determining factor always should be, if you have your stick on the puck, then you're actually making a play. So if you have your stick on the puck, people aren't going to get hurt. But if your stick is up and the only thing you're doing is you're knocking someone off the puck and then getting the puck, that's a totally different.
Right.
Because that's proper technique, is to have your stick on the puck. You shouldn't be, because I watch boys hockey all the time, and these are skating around, the sticks up in the air and they're hitting people, and and then the puck is there and they don't even pay attention to it.
Right.
So if you have your stick on the puck, I think that will really, and that's what the refs should look for, will really cut down on the injuries, but keep the physicality.
Sami, I'm thinking of Hillier, and a small.
Sarah Fillier?
Yeah, Sarah Fillier.
Yeah.
And the contact side, I think of the small NHL players that can't survive in the playoffs. Because
I think about the draft that just happened. So Sarah Fillier went first and Danielle Serdachny went second.
Yeah.
If you guys remember Danielle Serdachny, she's a 6-foot player. She scored the overtime winner for Canada to win it at the World Championships. because she stood in front of the net almost, I don't know if you guys know water polo at all, but you have a whole man that stands in front and you kind of dump it into them and then they kind of circle. They have their back to the goalie, and it seemed like reminiscent of that. And she just held off the defender because she could use her body. So, yeah, I mean, which one of those two is going to be successful next year? More successful. I mean, both will be successful. Both are amazing players, but which one will be more successful? And will it change the World Championship way of reffing as well? Because in the league they use AHL referees, but in IIHF they use women referees. So, will that change what the players get to see at the IIHF level versus PWHL level?
I want to ask you a goalie question.
Okay.
Okay. My frustration is I think they seem to use a butterfly as a security blanket. So I get frustrated when someone's up at the top of the circles, take a shot, and it goes over the goalie. They're teaching 5'2", 5'5" goalies, and they're dropping so early. Yeah. And then in the men's world championship, the Canada was playing Switzerland, and the St. Louis goalie, can't remember his name. The puck's against the boards at above the hash marks.
Yeah.
And the Swiss player got it and takes a slap shot under the crossbar, and he scored. And the goalie was down. If he stood up, it hits him right in the chest.
Yeah.
So when is the time they should be going down?
Going down. So Bobrovsky does it really well because there has to be a harboring back to a reactionary style goalie, and he's a smaller goalie than Skinner. Skinner can go down whenever he wants because his shoulders are still up in the crossbar, right?
Well, there's always this much room, and those guys hit it.
Oh yeah, for sure. So ideally, the goalie is supposed to be out and on angle tracking. So imagine a player coming in down we'll say down the right wing and or the left wing, and the player is or the goalie is out to their right side, and you're tracking. You shouldn't actually go down in a butterfly in a RVH against the post until, if you imagine that there's a line that goes from basically the center of the net to the bottom of the circles over to the boards. You know what I mean? So like the very bottom under the circles to the boards. If you were to like just paint that all red, that section, that triangle, that's where the goalie should be down, not above it. And most goalies that I see that are doing it wrong will go down when that triangle is up at the dot. Right? It shouldn't be the dot. It should be the bottom of the circle.
Yeah.
And
because that's what he was. I didn't even think it was a scoring chance.
Right.
And the game was
yeah.
It was overtime. The game was over.
Yeah, so they should still be out at a relatively high crease level. Not at the top of their crease because obviously there's not that much angle there, but still up. And when I did the goaltending seminar that Wally came and visited me at a couple of years ago, there was a big callback to using your hands and making decisions because that had gone away from the game. So I think goalie coaches now, everything lags in different areas. And so goalie coaches now, we're really comfortable at teaching that RVH, and goalies just are simply overusing it. I don't even, to be honest, Tom, I don't even teach it at my hockey school at all because my goalies are little and miniature, my oldest goalies at my goalie school are 15, 15-year-old girls. There's not that many that are that tall. I mean, some are pretty tall, and I might teach it on like a wraparound so that they understand the concept of it. And maybe a little bit of a walkout, but as soon as that person is walking out, I want you back up on your feet, pushing out, being in a ready position versus stagnant. I go back to Wally's teaching of getting your stick on puck as a goalie, like way more valuable than just stagnantly sitting there waiting. You're like a shooting duck, like you're just kind of waiting. And you're so set. It's a very awkward position. I don't know if you've ever put yourself in that position, but your limbs are not biomechanically ready to make any save. So the only thing you can really do is, they call it a chicken wing, which is like a reverse this way, which is your elbows. But that's so awkward. So I agree with you, Tom. It shouldn't have happened. They're being taught the wrong
My
way.
goalies, like last year, they're 5'2" and 5'5".
Mm-hmm.
The players are shooting from the ringette line. And there's a
Right.
couple of top scorers in the league, and they'd score because they'd shoot in the top.
Yeah.
And you're saying, how in the world are you letting in that goal? Because if it just stood there,
yeah, you could stop it.
Doesn't even look like a scoring chance.
Yeah, I would say any goalie or any coach that is struggling with that frustration with their goalie, to go back to working on simply shooting high and having the goalie watch it into their glove, watch it into their blocker, and being able to make the decision as to when to go down. Even now, I don't know if you watch in the NHL and some of the highest levels, the paddle length on the goalie stick is half the size it was. So it looks like a miniature hockey stick. And the goalie stick is actually not supposed to be on the ice in the standing position. So they're standing and they're waiting, but it's measured to your butterfly. It's not measured to your standing position anymore. So when you go down to the butterfly, then your stick is in a good, solid position to be in the butterfly. Rather than in the past, it had to be a lot further out and at more steep angle so the puck could ramp up. Now it's like just set. And so that to me trickles down to the younger levels, but then the younger levels don't need that because they shouldn't be in the butterfly as often. They should be able to skate and be able to push cross crease standing. But that isn't taught as much because you see what the highest level is doing, and that's what coaches think you should be doing. But they don't have the athleticism to do what those guys are doing. Yeah, so I always recommend, like, I'd rather them watch a goalie like Bobrovsky or somebody like Emmerich Smashmeyer in the PWHL, because that's maybe the stature more of these goalies than watching somebody like Anne-Renee Desbiens is taller and just, she's a taller goalie. So you're not necessarily going to be able to play like her right away, or Corrine Schroeder, who's 6 foot with New York. So you got to learn all those other techniques and know what your skill set is too. So yeah, have them watch Emmerich Smashmeyer or Elaine Chuli in Montreal, another, 5'3" goalie, so quick and was dominant this year in the PWHL. Actually outperformed Anne-Renee Desbiens in terms of save percentage in games won and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it just looks like a security blanket sometimes. Totally. Yeah, you think down and yeah, or like I don't see the puck, so I'm just going to go down. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can, rather than trying to fight to see the puck and trying to look around the screen and figuring out where you are. And anyways, it is a security blanket. I think you're right, Tom. Yeah, I just wonder what the guideline was, because so it's that triangle along the bottom of the circles. Now every rink is going to be a little bit different, but where we did the at COP, it was the bottom of the circles there. That's helpful. Just draw a line with a bingo dabber from the center of the net, so not the post, but the center of the net, over to the boards, to under the circle. Yeah. And you'll be able to see that the angle that the goalie has to cover in order to have no puck go in is very minimal. So that Edmonton guy, Draisaitl. Oh, Draisaitl, yeah. He shoots for that, eh? Oh, yeah. I mean, if I'm a player. Yeah. And if he puts it in the top a little bit, he scores a lot of goals there. Well, the best players, I mean, should be going to shoot at goalie camps to find out what goalies are doing. I mean, the more you know about your opponent and what their first move is, the more you're going to figure it out. So that's my suggestion for any shooters. Well, I remember Kiprusoff, he played a little different. He played really up, like really made himself tall, and he was, I think he was 6'1" or something. He wasn't huge like these other guys, but there wasn't a whole lot of room, up high. Whereas somebody like Jonathan Quick pushed himself out, so he would be super low, but he would have his hands out so far that he would cut off the angle, because just simply mathematics, getting your hands out further makes you taller too. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. But yeah, Kiprusoff would just be very upright, so that almost like Archer Zerbe was that way too, that he would be nice and upright and take up, I mean, not a big goalie, but take up a lot of the net.
Well, Calgary's going to have a goalie next year he's 5'11" or 6 feet, and everybody's talking about he's too small. And he's been the MVP in the American League a few times. He played a little for them last year, and that's basically how he's got to play.
Who is the goalie?
Wolf.
Oh, okay. I did a couple Marlies games this year where I got to do color commentating, so I knew I had to learn up, but I never had the Flames franchise.
Yeah, he played the last half of the year for the Flames, but he was, but he was MVP 2 years ago in the American League. And
well, the one that I watched a bunch was Devin Levi. I think that's how you say his last name, with the Americans in Rochester. He would be considered a smaller goalie, but he was quick, and his mechanics were spot on. So whether he gets a chance with Buffalo or not, I don't know, but he was certainly really good at that level.
How big is Bobrovsky?
Good question. I mean, he looks smaller because he's playing against Skinner, I'm going to guess like 5'11", 6 foot, but.
Yeah, you can see when the players come up to him after the game, and they always bump heads.
Yeah. Most
of the players are a little taller than he is, which is unusual for a goalie.
I'm going to look it up.
So if that's the case, he may be a model for how to goaltend.
Yeah.
Sami, at your hockey schools, and I don't know if they're elite enough, do you bring up that point, bottom of circle, that triangle?
Yeah, we do. We do off-ice teaching that way, for sure. And then on-ice teaching, we do some drills that incorporate, kind of when to do it. So we might do a wrap where player skates behind the net, then wraps, and you have to be down low for the stuff. Yeah. And then the other player from the other side skates around the other way on the net. And then we have a cone that makes them come out up and higher. So the goalie has to recover and realize, I can be standing on that side. I just looked up Bobrovsky's height. He's 6'2", 188. But that could be exaggerated a little bit.
I don't think
they tend to exaggerate them a little bit.
Yeah.
Sami, I've got a question. Back in your day, you played goal, but you were an athlete in many different sports. How much technical training in goaltending did you get?
Well, I think, Wally, you might know this answer. My first goalie coach was with the Olympic team in Nagano. So I first learned how to butterfly at Olympic camp. I didn't really know how to do that. So, but to say that I didn't have any technical training would be a misnomer. I did go to camps in the summer. I went to Rick St. Croix goalie school in Winnipeg all the time. So worked with him. And in fact, when I was recently inducted into the Manitoba Hockey Hall of Fame, I brought Rick and got to hang out with him again, which was so fun to see him again. Because he was really the only goalie coach that I had really seen, and he let me come to his camps. Like, that was a big deal back then, to have a girl at your camps back then. So he let me come and, treated me like everybody else. But I would say all through my even university day, high school days, it was still skate saves, right? So you're exposing the back of your leg and you're trying to make the hit the puck to your skate. I look back at it now, why we thought exposing the back of your leg was a smart idea was, so many bruises in your calves. We're not using the front of our pads to make these saves. So anyway, skate saves and a lot of stand-up hockey, which made us, I think, really good skaters. But I think learning butterfly technique and learning then first VH, then RVH as my career progressed was really hard on my body because my body wasn't used to all of these muscles that were being utilized in the new techniques. So we do try to expose younger kids to some of these techniques because their muscles just need to develop at a certain rate as well. They can't just suddenly learn to butterfly at the age of 22 like I did. Well, maybe 20. But anyways, yeah, I think that eventually was what led to a hip replacement, and now feel good. But I think injuries were because of all of these different techniques. So like the RVH now, which is where you do the post lean, which was the end of my career. So I'm 48 and I played until I was 42. So this is 6 years ago. And we're just kind of starting that technique. It is the top of your glute that is then pushing off of the post. So it is no longer you pick up your leg and you're pushing with your quad, which is your biggest muscle, which is what I was used to. You're now pushing with kind of your low back glute, which is very small muscles back there. So that was probably the hardest, I think, on my body, as well as our knee pads that we were landing on when I first started was felt, obviously. There wasn't much to it. And then as we progressed, you started to have like a little bit of a knee pad. And then now the knee pads are probably about this big. So it puts your hip and your leg and your knee at a much different angle. So you're not putting as much stress on any of your joints, which is really smart. So if you watch the NHL goalies, the inner knee part that is part of their pad is now about this thick, I would say, maybe even thicker. So it makes their leg at this angle versus ours that was like gorked out and, more like that. So, yeah, just advancements in equipment and everything have really changed the game. But I don't know if I even answered your question, Wally, but I like talking goalies.
No,
think,
you did. I have another question, goaltending related, but it's more of a sports psych thing. And this comes from just over the years working with scouting and looking at goalies. My criteria was not technical. Is you've got to stop the first shot. If you don't, we're not looking at you. You stop the second, we're going to watch you. You stop the third, we're likely going to invite you. And that's what you did when, in my circle of observing goalies. But psychologically, watching young goaltenders, and I experienced this last year with a goalie who absolutely would psych out giving up a bad goal and literally stop trying. And it became a distraction for the team. So the conversation was, do you go back and pat them on the back to comfort them, but this particular goalie didn't want that and made it clear. And I'm not sure that this goalie is even going to play anymore because her ability to handle giving up a goal, and it wasn't just her, it was, she needed some work in refocusing after goals. And I attempted to talk to her and her parents about this idea of refocusing strategies and having a routine, which I believe helps. And it may have been too young an age to begin that kind of thing, but it definitely was out of the wheelhouse of the adults concerned because they interpreted that she didn't need a psychiatrist kind of thing. So how does this play into teaching young goalies? At what point is there formal education and training about coping with giving up a bad goal or making a mistake?
Yeah, interesting question, Wally. I think, I always say to parents, one way to figure out if your kid is going to be a good goalie is how they recover after goals, even from a young age. Like, are they okay with it? Like, you got to kind of be okay with letting goals in. You got to be okay with failure. And so I don't want everybody on this call to go and become an elite athlete. So there's going to be goalies that are going to be better at that skill and not, but I would say most elite goalies are very good at that skill, at parking it and regrouping. Be interesting to hear from, so two goalies in particular. One, Kristen Campbell, didn't have a good start to the season. And, you know, there's a lot of flack being taken in Toronto that they didn't have a elite goalie. And she works with Brad Kirkwood, who is the goalie coach in Toronto and also with the national team. And so either her or them together were able to regroup and refocus. And she ended up going on a huge hot streak and got the goalie of the year. So she is somebody that is so planned and so meticulous about every detail. It'd be interesting to hear from her what they did together to refocus. Because at the start, I felt like you scored one goal on her and you just knew that Toronto wasn't going to come back and win because it kind of opened the floodgates. And then after that, you know, early goals didn't seem to really bother her. So I'd be really interested to hear from her as to how that she made that progression. The other goalie is Elaine Chuli, who I talked about, who was drafted to the Montreal team. She was our goalie last year in Toronto when we won the Isabel Cup, but also was our goalie when I was the general manager for the Toronto Furies. And she had come in with Shea Tiley, another highly touted goalie. They had about half, they split the games, and Shea ended up getting the playoffs. But the one thing with Elaine that I really never played with as a goalie partner was she was that person that she had to be alone before the games. She wasn't around the team. She was super focused. She did not want a pat on the shoulder. You know, don't talk to her. She's going to go out first and she's going to be quiet and she's going to be like super focused. And I'd never played with that style of goalie. So as a coach, I wasn't really sure general manager. So it's not like I was having to do much with the actual players, but I had never really seen that. But what I felt like happened was, you know, first couple goals go in and then it's really hard to recover when you're that focused on one singular outcome is what it seemed like. However, this year with the Montreal team, I felt like there was a new rejuvenated Elaine Chuli who seemed to be more jovial with her teammates going out onto the ice. There's less pressure because Anne Renee was the starting goalie. She just had to come in and do her job in sort of the extra games. And so anyways, at the elite level, she was, I think she had the best season she's ever had. And so she changed something she was exceptional last year with us, I would say, for sure. But she just took it to a whole new level. And she seemed to embrace the team atmosphere more than she had before. And maybe that was a slow progression. I'm not sure. But so back to your question, at a young age, when do you start to introduce that? I mean, I think that, you know, some people are cut out to be goalies and some aren't. Like, it's not for everybody. Some will go on to become elite and some won't. But that to me is definitely a sports psychology. Like, they should be working with somebody if they're open to it. And if it's just coaches that are working with them, you know, I think letting them know that it is sport and this isn't, that their identity isn't defined by whether they let a goal in or not. We had some techniques back when I was goaltending to park it. So what I would do is when I let a goal in, I would always want that next puck. So I'd be excited for the next face-off. And then after the game, I would go through and I would write down in my journal how every goal went in. So I knew that I was going to be able to replay it and go through all of the issues with the goal after the game. And that helped me because then I felt like I didn't have to deal with it right then. Whether it's a good goal, bad goal, whatever, I just want that next puck and I want to get back into it. Now, that doesn't always happen. Obviously, sometimes you feel mentally more drained than other times. But journaling really helped me and helped me allow me to know like what I should have done, what I need to work on. Was it a good goal? Was it a bad goal? And, you know, 90% of the goals are good goals. So you just have to credit the player for a good shot and move on. So I don't know if those techniques can help younger players, but parking it is one. And some goalies you'll see they'll spray a water bottle, and then they'll have to like try to focus on one individual little drip. So that like takes them into the next, makes them focus on something else versus the goal that just went in, and tries to sort of refresh their mind. Every goalie has kind of different techniques, but yeah, you don't even have to pay for a sports psychologist. You can simply look up some of these techniques on the internet and find what can work for your goalie.
Tom, did any of your goalies practice those kind of things?
I don't know if they did or not. I kind of mentioned David Marcoux thing he did with Kiprusoff to them. You know, where I think he flip his mask up, take a drink of water, think about it while he swished the water around his mouth, and then when he spit out the water, put his mask back. It was over, and it was that was his routine. So,
I mean, it's a great routine. It's whatever gets you able to then be back into the game, right?
yeah.
Now, I got a question, Sami. You mentioned Montreal, and they have a starter and an obvious backup.
Mm-hmm.
Tom doesn't. He does. He may have talent-wise, but in minor hockey, the routine is to alternate goalies. And I've discovered over the years that when I decided to play games with that rotation, and ended up going with what I thought was the starter, I lost the spirit of the other goalie. And this was at an under 15 boys level.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always found, and goaltending is a little bit precarious, but I know many coaches get caught up with at the end of the season. They've alternated all year, but in the playoffs, they might get by the first round alternating, but then the heat's on, and they decide to name a starter. And I happened to observe a team practice after the coach named the starter for the remainder of the playoffs. And they were totally dialed out of the practice, making it useless. And I'm not even sure what impact it had on the team, but what's your thoughts on starting, backing up, rotating, equal rotation to the end, or what do you think? And I'm talking minor hockey now.
Yeah. Well,
I got to go let my dog be back.
Yeah. So just know that every time you back up sucks, and it's not fun. No matter, you try to like get yourself into a spirit to be there. It is not why you signed up for sport, to sit on the bench. So that's never fun. So I think, how do you mitigate that? I think exactly what you did, Wally, which was you alternate. I think in the minor hockey level, there's no reason why you can't alternate. You're right. You lose the spirit of the other kid when they are made to feel less than, or are simply not getting to play in games and feel valued on a team. I mean, that's exactly what we all strive for in sport. So, I mean, why do it? To win one game, to win one tournament? I mean, as a coach, you can figure it out. If you want to have a goalie who plays in a final game, for instance, figure out if you have 5 games in a tournament, you can probably mathematically figure it out what game you want what you perceive to be a better goalie to be in. But that never has to be shared with the goalies. I think that Minnesota won a cup, the Walter Cup this year, alternating Maddie Rooney and Nicole Hensley, 2 goalies. Maddie Rooney won the Olympics in 2018 in Sochi when they beat Canada, and Nicole Hensley has been the Team USA starter / backup for the past 4 or 5 years. So they alternated them all season, and then even in the playoffs, they did something a little bit different so that a goalie played until they lost, and then the other goalie went in. So they'd get 2 or 3 games, and then the other goalie would go in, and then that way. But Yeah, I think in minor hockey, I mean, there's a ton of money too. You have parents that are paying big dollars. Nobody, I think if you're not a goalie, everybody will say, well, they knew what they're getting themselves into. They know the other goalie's better. I don't care if you know the other goalie's better. I don't care if that goalie way outperforms you. It's still not fun to sit on the bench and not get to play. I mean, playing the game is the most fun of it all. And it's one thing to practice, but in practice as a goalie, that's not really where you're being taught to shine. But if you do happen to be on a team where there's a clear starter that you want to have a starting all the games, then as a coach, it is your responsibility to make sure in practices there's enough competitive drills so that other goalie feels like they are getting to prove themselves to you, because that's where the goalie wants that. They just want to have eyes on them. They want to know that if there is a clear starter, that I'm going to do everything I can as a backup to be able to be better than that clear starter. And so I want drills that are competitive, that are, scored in a certain way so that I can show that I can be better. And if I'm not better, then I understand why I'm not starting. And I would say that you don't start to do that until at least the U18 level, maybe U15 sometimes, but still then that to me is, I mean, these are still just kids, 13, 14-year-old kids that just want to play the game. So does that answer your question, Wally?
Yeah, it does. And I thought of something here, and I'll throw it at you. One of the more important things is to prepare a goalie for elite hockey university. There's going to be a starter and a backup, and maybe not. But the reality is, if you grow up always alternating and never experience not playing, I'm suggesting at U15 level, I'm generalizing here, but theorizing, if a goalie has a hot game, they get another one.
Yeah,
and
it's not a bad idea.
I would prepare each of them for that scenario.
Right, so they can both have that opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they have a normally good game, it's rotation.
Yeah.
If they have a bad game, it's rotation.
Yeah.
And you live with that. But there is something to be said with mentally preparing them for, like you said, wanting to earn your role as a backup and prove yourself over time.
Yeah, but Wally, I never played on a team that didn't alternate really until, well, even all through my Olympic career, I would say. Really until Salt Lake City Olympics was the first time that I ever was skipped over in a game that was like not alternating. And so I don't know that had I been a backup for longer, that would have prepared me more for that situation. I don't think you ever have to mentally prepare somebody for failure. Like, I don't know. I like the idea that if you get on a heater, you could play another game, maybe. But, if there's only 2 games in a weekend for some minor hockey teams, now that goalie goes a full 2 weeks without playing, the other goalie.
Yeah.
And then, like, you've had no exercise. Like, what's the whole point of sport? Is to go out and, be fit and active. You've had no exercise. So, like, also you're in a whole different sphere, like now the rest of your team is maybe recovering from a game. You're not recovering. You're not doing any of the same workouts, but then you're expected to do the same workouts. So I think as much as you can alternate at a youth level, at a younger level, I think is important. And like I said, Minnesota rode it all the way to the cup because then they had 2 goalies that were ready to play, so that when one faltered, the other one went in. And yeah, I think that is what won them the cup in the end.
I think the message being delivered is make your philosophy clear as a coach, communicate it with all your players and your goalies, and walk the talk in terms of consistency of how you deliver. And I think they'll support you. But
For
when
sure.
you
Like
don't,
when I played with Kenny Dufton, we knew we were alternating. My goalie partner, Kendra Fisher, we knew we were alternating. And it just, if one landed to be a national championship final and it wasn't your turn to play, it just wasn't your turn to play. Now, he did alternate so that if we had a nationals and we had another big game like a league championship, that we would both get the opportunity to play in a big league, like a big game. So that was the only time that he went out of alternating, was in those situations. But you knew, and it also made it easier to support the other person too, because you really could cheer you weren't cheering for them to falter, which also is like a really tough thing for a goalie mentally, because you so badly, this is your friend, you're taught to like be a goalie partner with them and support them, but then when they do bad, you get to play, and that's just such a tough thing on team morale and on personal morale as well.
Tom, do you have anything on goaltending, or are you like most coaches and their targets?
I think Tom takes more care of his goalies than that. Wally, I'm going to have to go in about 10 minutes, and Tom, just to let you know.
Real good.
Well, it's so different in college and in kids hockey and this kind of stuff. I know when my son played, I had two goalies for years and they just alternate all the time, no matter what the game was. I know in college, in the playoffs, most of the time I go with one goalie. If there's for sure a difference.
Yeah. And playoffs are
year
pretty quick,
happened-
right? In U sports,
Yeah,
like playoffs are pretty quick. Like you're what,
you're done in 2 days.
Yeah.
If you don't.
exactly. So
And what I did this year is I had one goalie was definitely, and she was a second year. So she was bigger and had a better save percentage, everything like that, than the other goalie. So come the playoffs, I talked to them, and it was the smaller goalie's turn. I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, and I talked to him about it. I said, she's a second year, and she'll play the first game, you'll play the second game. And that's what happened. We got 49 shots and scored one goal.
oh my
We
gosh.
lost both games 2-1, and both goalies played well.
Both goalies did what they
Smaller,
could.
5'2", and she stopped dropping into the butterfly, so the top of the net wasn't wide open. She played pretty well. So, I mean, that was the thing, is the mantra of 2 or less goals. They did their job, but
Yeah.
you're getting
Yeah, and
45,
the reason
49
I think
shots.
Minnesota was able to go far into the playoffs is their best 3 out of 5. So that makes a big difference to be able to alternate.
We had
like
a 2 out of 3, so
yeah, you got to have a decision made prior. Like they were able to ride a goalie until they lost, but one loss wasn't that big of a deal, right? So they could kind of keep riding that goalie. So Maddie Rooney basically played the semifinals, then lost the first game of the finals, and then Nicole Hensley took it the rest of the way.
yeah. And one of my friends said when I went to Bemidji, he went to Denver.
Mm-hmm.
He played behind Ronnie Graham, who played a long time in the NHL. And I think in 4 years, well, 3, because the first year you couldn't play then. In 3 years, he played like 3 or 4 games.
Mm.
And it was the same when I was in Bemidji. We had one goalie that played basically all the games. I don't even know if the other got a game. But, but that's that level, a different level.
Which is a different level, of course.
I've got a real funny story here. When I left hockey and was going to teach phys ed, I happened into the phys ed office at St. Mary's High School. And one of the phys ed teachers had played at University of Michigan. And he had a picture, 2 pictures. He had pictures of a skater's outfit and a goaltender's outfit. And I said, well, what's this all about? And he said, well, he was in his fourth year. And Tony Esposito was the starting goalie. And he made the team on defense.
No way. Good for him.
He actually played. He said, I didn't get the critical minutes, but he did get to play. So, and
That's
I'm thinking,
awesome.
yeah, goalies are usually pretty good athletes. And, you know, if you look at your multi-sport background, Sammy, that would hold true to that cause. It's a very athletic, demanding position. And I always equate it with a back catcher.
Hmm.
And it's stressful on the body. You're never given a break. It's 60 minutes in, and it's emotionally even more draining. So kudos to you, Sammy, for surviving in goaltending. And I am going to contact Carla and send her an email. But the catch is going to be having you moderate the session.
That'd be fun. Also, contact Howie. I know that you're good friends with him, and see if he'd be willing to come on.
Who's that?
Howie Draper.
Okay.
You guys both know him, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I've only met him through the Sharks.
Yep. Well, we've got one that's hung in there and one that didn't.
Yeah, so I'd be curious to hear their experiences, the ups and downs. Like it's all new for all of us. So
Well, I'm not sure how Howie's coaching team was selected. I know that Carla picked her coaching team.
mm-hmm.
So it's difficult. You have a philosophy of coaching. You're going to coach the way you coach, and you have to have support around you.
Yeah, I mean, I know he got the Hockey Canada goalie coach down there with him, who coached U18s with him.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming he got to select
Yeah.
who he had, but I don't know.
Well, pro hockey's a different kettle of fish.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt about that. And I still think the philosophy of team first wins in pro hockey. And I'm glad to hear the story of Minnesota and the goaltenders and the so-called second goalie winning it for them. Because the best team wins, not necessarily the best player, and that's a great example. So, look, thanks for coming on, Sammy.
Yeah, good to see both of you guys. It's been a while. This other
Yeah.
real work stuff gets in the way sometimes.
All right. Well, don't work too hard. Short. Okay.
All right. And thanks for the
Take care.
photos, Tom. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Do you want the Latvia videos too? You didn't hear that one.
So, Tom, the rink you're at tomorrow?
Flames Arena, where we watch the Chinese play.
Okay. And it's at noon?
Yeah, well, we all go and have a beer in the parking lot after, at the end of the parking lot, if you would just want to go there. If you don't want to watch that awful hockey.
What time does it start?
Well, we play from 12 to 1:15, and I don't even know if we're allowed to have showers. We weren't allowed to have showers on Tuesday
Okay.
because of this water thing.